Welcome back to Vantage Point here on Newsfirst. We've been speaking about the upcoming presidential elections. Now, there are reports that the elections are going to be held in January next year. And it's interesting to hear the reports that are coming out, Doctor, about the various characters who have been making statements about the elections and about the executive presidency. A person who has been very vocal about this is Venerable Madhuluave Sobiratheru, who has been constantly saying that the executive presidency should be abolished. And there are certain sentiments within the opposition, and I'm not talking about the UMP alone. We spoke about how the opposition is now split into several factions, about fielding him as a common candidate.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, not much. Anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 votes. I mean, it's a farce. You cannot, in a country which has had universal suffrage from 1931 and an entrenched multi-party system for decades, I mean, you can't field a monk, a reverend monk, as the presidential candidate against Mahinda Rajapaksa. I mean, people are going to wonder, I mean, how is this reverend going to lead the country? And we are in a situation where we can't afford to play around. I mean, you need a strong leader. You've got Mr. Modi coming in, you've got Navi Pillai, you've got Sri Lanka is in trouble. You need a strong leader, you need a strong center, strong leadership. What is this Reverend Sir going to do? Now, the Reverend Sir says, I'm going to abolish the presidency. The answer to that is, who told you to abolish the presidency? I mean, nobody asked you to. The country, there's no big movement. If anybody does a public opinion poll, I don't think the people of this country are going to say that the abolition of the executive presidency is one of the major concerns. The major concerns would be economic hardships, external pressures, and the quality of governance. Now, I look at those who have been endorsing this slogan, abolish the executive presidency. Now, why isn't it that the UNP, the Leadership Council, which is saying, you know, we want to abolish the executive presidency, why didn't they say this when they were moving the 17th Amendment? Now, I think the 17th Amendment was a very good thing. I don't think the 18th Amendment is a good thing. But I don't think that Sri Lanka became a dictatorship because of the 18th Amendment. Now, when the 17th Amendment was moved and the independent commissions were set up, it was obviously because it was thought that that's what you need. You can have the presidency, that's okay, but there must not be a hyper-politicization of the bureaucracy. So you need independent commissions, the police commission and so on and so forth. And I think things improved during that time. It's bad that they were abolished. So what the UNP should logically be saying is, when we are elected, we shall reintroduce the 17th Amendment. That's what they should say. We shall make sure that the judiciary is independent. We are the ones who brought in the 17th Amendment, or we proposed it, the ones who went across. But now they've discovered that the problem is not the absence of the 17th Amendment and independent commissions, but the executive presidency itself. It's not just funny, it's also arrogant. Because whoever who says that they will come in, abolish the executive presidency in 6 months and go home, I mean, is that what they should be saying? They should be saying, we shall consult the people at a referendum as to whether the people of this country want the executive presidency retained in its present form, or whether they want it reformed, or whether they want it completely abolished. You ask the people, who gave you the right, these politicians or clerics and reverend sirs, who gave them the right to abolish the executive presidency? You need a separate referendum precisely on this subject. And you know, I wish Mahinda Rajapaksa were to have a referendum now, because it will make all these guys look stupid. Have a referendum on whether or not to abolish the executive presidency or reform it by bringing in the 70s, bringing back the 70th Amendment. Mahinda Rajapaksa won't ask that, but or whether it should be retained. I mean, retain or abolish, and let's see what happens. I mean, this is really crazy.
Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, you were also talking about a candidate that could really challenge President Rajapaksa. Now, we saw at the last presidential election how General Sarath Fonsca came out, and he really did gather a lot of support before he was imprisoned. Now he's out of prison, he's got his own party, the Democratic Party. They've shown that they have been a force to contend with. What are your thoughts on General Fonsca contesting? Do you think he'll contest, or do you think he will contest as a common candidate of maybe two parties merging together?
Well, I have about three thoughts. One is that we don't really know whether he can contest the presidency, and I don't think we should get ourselves into a trap where all hopes are raised about General Fonsca as a candidate, and then the government gets somebody to petition the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, having deliberated independently, decides that he can't. You know, then we're back to square one, and that can very well happen. So why take that risk? This is one thing. The second thing is that the people, I think, would like very much to see General Fonsca in Parliament and his party in Parliament, keeping a check on the government. But the people of this country also tend to go for someone who they think is warm and likable, but also is a strong leader. This is the famous beer test that I keep talking about, where the Americans say you can tell who's going to win the presidential election if you ask the question, which candidate would you rather like to have a beer with? So if it's a question of which candidate would you rather like to have a cup of tea with, I still think it's going to be Mahinda Rajapaksa. The people have their own views as to the personality, individuality, and character of each candidate. There might be some caution, maybe even well-placed caution, when it comes to the choice of General Fonsca as the leader of the country. I think the country now needs a more moderate singular Buddhist or more moderate nationalist leader, or more liberal or progressive, but patriotic leader. Now, there's no question about the patriotism of either General Fonsca or President Rajapaksa, but I'm not sure that the adjectives moderate, progressive, or liberal could be applied to General Fonsca. So I'm not very convinced about that. Mahina, rather than go round and round the mulberry bush, I mean, if the opposition is going to be silly and, talk about Reverend Sobita and Ranil and Chandrika and so on, and if the Fonsca candidacy is the kind of risk that we shouldn't take because of the role that the Supreme Court might have, I think there's a very simple option. I think that Anura Kumara Dissanayake of the JVP would be a good candidate, a common candidate, because, he is going to give the president a run for his money. He may not get as many votes as someone from the major parties, but he's going to be less vulnerable to the charges that the government's candidate, that President Rajapaksa, can level at Ranil or at Chandrika. He's not going to be vulnerable to tripping up by the Supreme Court, as General Fonsca might be. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake is going to be able to take the battle right to the government in the way that he's doing it in Parliament. He can air a lot of grievances, he can bring out a lot of material about the president, not about the president personally, but about the way things are in the country. And he can make the presidential election the campaign a real race, so that it immediately translates itself into gains at the parliamentary election that will follow. I would consider him a far more serious opposition candidate than Reverend Sobita, and perhaps a more serious candidate than Ranil or Chandrika.
Well, it's yet to be seen. We have to basically keep an eye on what's going to happen in the next couple of months leading to the elections in January. But right now, Doctor, there is a lot of heating up in the political arena because of elections happening elsewhere in the world, and that is the largest democratic elections taking place in India, where those elections too, as we spoke about in our previous program, have an impact on Sri Lanka. It may even have an impact on how elections are going to be held in January, the Geneva sessions in March, and so on. The two candidates who are running for presidency, who are running for the elections in India is Narendra Modi and young Rahul Gandhi. Now, Narendra Modi, in a rally in Tamil Nadu, had some very vocal thoughts about Sri Lanka and about the Tamil community residing in different parts of the world. I'll just read you a statement that he made, Doctor. He said that the Tamils living all over the world, including in Malaysia, Sri Lanka and Fiji, it should be a priority of the Indian government to take care of their well-being, and he also promised to do so if a BJP-led government assumes power after the elections. What sort of message does this give? So it's just a basic message, but there's so much to this that could be inferred.
It's not the first time, Mahina, that he has said this. Now, I'm not anti-Modi or pro-Modi, I'm pro-Sri Lanka, so I look at it from that point of view. What Mr. Modi is saying is very similar to something that President Putin, whom I like, I mean, I'm a Putin fan, has been saying recently and early in 2008 about Georgia, about Russian speakers. Now, I'm a little concerned about that because President Putin has been saying that if Russian-speaking people, if ethnic Russians, anywhere in Europe, the Ukraine and other places, if they feel that they are oppressed and marginalized, well, they can always look to Mother Russia, and that Russia cannot turn its back on these communities. Now, that makes for what is known as irredentism, that is where those ethnic groups in another country look to the mother country in order to join it. Now, in the case of India, the Mahatma Gandhi and Sri Jawaharlal Nehru made it very clear to the Indian communities in the world that they must consider themselves part of the country that they're living in and integrate into those countries, and that India was not going to mess around on behalf of people of Indian origin. But that was the doctrine of the Congress tradition. Mr. Modi is saying something new. He's saying wherever there are Tamils, could be Malaysia, Fiji, and he mentions Sri Lanka, they will be the responsibility of India under my administration, under BJP administration. Now, that's not the only thing he has said. He's also said that the neighbors, and he mentions Sri Lanka in that classification, have been poking at India, he says.
Specifically Sri Lanka, Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Exactly. And he says that will change under BJP administration. That's also new. Launching the BJP manifesto in Tamil Nadu, BJP personality said that the Congress could not get the 13th Amendment implemented, but that a BJP government will ensure that Sri Lanka does this expeditiously, that it's going to speed up the process of delivering devolution to the Tamils. I think we are lucky that they've stopped at the 13th Amendment, because if you go by the Ukraine and so on, the next stop might be a kind of federalization. Now, just the other night, the NDTV had a very interesting foreign policy debate where the Congress was represented by Shashi Tharoor, the third force was represented by another speaker whose name I cannot remember at the moment. But most importantly, the BJP was represented by Ambassador Hardeep Singh Puri, who was the number 2 in the Sri Lanka mission under the legendary Mani Dixit. If you take a photograph of the signing of the Indo-Lanka Accord, you have this young diplomat, very striking diplomat in a Sikh, in a turban, on one side of the photograph, Jaya Jayawardena, Rajiv Gandhi, Hamid, and so on. And that's Hardeep Puri. He was a protege of the iconic Mani Dixit. Hardeep Puri was also, most recently, India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, where he secured 140 votes, a record number of votes for the election in which India got the rotating chair of the Security Council. He beat Japan. So this is a very able guy. Now I know both Shashi Tharoor and Hardeep Puri, so I was very interested in listening to the debate. Hardeep Puri has written an article last year in the Hindu on Sri Lanka. So he's been in touch with the Sri Lankan issue. And he said that it was right that India should have supported Sri Lanka to crush the LTTE. I must share with our viewers that I met him on his way through Geneva to New York, and this was before the war was over in 2007. He's as anti-LTTE as any of us. So that's a big plus. But he also says in that article that Sri Lanka has not implemented the 13th Amendment. And therefore it was right for India in 2012 and 2013 to support the resolutions in Geneva. Now, in the television debate, he made it very clear that India would press the reset button in its relationship with its neighbors under the BJP administration. That India would draw very clear red lines in a manner that the Congress administration has not drawn. And that neighbors would know what India's red lines are. Now we are really talking not of necessarily an anti-Sri Lankan approach at all, because I don't see Hardeep Puri as anti-Sri Lankan. But it's going to be a more robust kind of diplomacy. It's not going to be the Congress diplomacy. What we got away with Manmohan Singh and Shiv Shankar Menon is not something that we are going to be able to repeat with Mr. Modi and Mr. Puri if he is the National Security Advisor. So Sri Lanka can have a very good ally, because if we work within those red lines, which means that we shouldn't have any delusions that we can be a Pakistan on India's doorstep, or that China is going to come and help us against India, or that we can be in Israel on India's doorstep. If we don't have those delusions, and if we work within the security red lines that our big neighbor would indicate, as the Russians are indicating on their borders.
In Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. And earlier Georgia, because the Georgians tried to cross the red line and the Russians pushed back and took part of Georgia away, in a sense. It happened in Ukraine as well. So one has to know what the red lines are. But if we cooperate and solidly, if we implement the 13th Amendment, then we have an important chance. We can then secure the support of this robust and more nationalist India, less pro-Western India under Mr. Modi. We can use the relationship to buffer ourselves from the intrusive international inquiry that's coming at us like a poisoned arrow. We can use the Indian shield, but you can't use the Indian shield unless we are willing to cut a deal and implement it fairly fast, because there is going to be a difference in style and in tone in a BJP administration, especially if Ambassador Puri is the NSA. He's a very able man, and I must say that he's far more able and strong a personality than any official that we have on this side, whoever he is. So I really wouldn't get into, I wouldn't advise us to get into a confrontation with the BJP administration and with its probable new national security advisor.
Will that mean
he can be a good friend.
Will that mean we'll have to work very closely with the Tamil National Alliance and give ear to what the Tamil National Alliance has to say?
Well, what it means, Mahina, is simply this. I don't believe that we should appease either the TNA or the West or anyone else. But I do believe that we should speedily implement the 13th Amendment, have a timetable that we can agree on with the TNA, implement that, because if we don't, we have to learn the lessons of what has happened in the Ukraine. Even the negotiations, the successful negotiations between John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov in Geneva came to the conclusion that either the Ukraine has to federalize or, as Sergei Lavrov said, remain a formally unitary state but have regional self-government, not national self-determination as some of the Tamil representatives say, but regional self-government. So we must implement the 13th Amendment because it's the best deal we are going to get. And if we don't implement it soon enough, then we will be under pressure to federalize or worse. I don't think we should play games with Mr. Modi's administration. I think we should talk to the TNA. It's because we are not talking to the TNA that we have the well-intentioned initiative from South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. That's because there's no process of political dialogue. If we had one, then nobody would have to come in and try to fix it. So I think we should restart the dialogue with the TNA, forget this whole story about the Parliamentary Select Committee, have a dialogue, the government and the TNA, just talk about how the 13th Amendment can be implemented and by when, what the problems are on both sides, remove the obstacles. If the government wants to hold back something, that's also okay, but say that we will, in exchange, we will look at the concurrent list and transfer certain powers from the concurrent list to the province in exchange for holding back certain other powers that we would like to keep. So the 13th Amendment has to be the framework because otherwise I don't know where we will stop. And this should be done quite expeditiously because time is not on our side and space is shrinking.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, for joining us on another edition of Vantage Point. It was interesting to hear your thoughts about India. And the Indian elections are well and through. May will be a decisive month for India because the election results will be coming out and we'll know for sure who will be the person steering India in to the next couple of years and also have an impact on Sri Lanka. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching us on Vantage Point. We'll see you again in a fortnight with more insightful information about the political arena. Take care and good night.